Okay, welcome back. Thanks for listening. This is usually the algorithm which I think is pretty intuitive to explain, but always sort of get me not in my brain when I try to explain it. So if I explain it the wrong way around, bear with me. And look at the code later, because I think it is quite intuitive to implement. And if you look at the code, it might be easier than from my explanation. But I'll give it a go. I've published this morning the second part of the worksheet for this week. And this worksheet contains explanation about two further bots that we supply, and that is a skeleton of the min-max and a skeleton of the alpha-beta pruning. So you don't need to take care of all the sort of nitty-gritty programming stuff, but you just have to look at the implementation of the algorithm. So I suggest try to do this as soon as you can, and then if you're getting into trouble, get an appointment tomorrow with one of the TAs to help you with the implementation. Yeah, do you have a question?
Is there a deadline for this week for when the first part of the project is finished?
That's a very good question, thank you. The question was whether there is a deadline for handing in results, and the answer is no. So this course is so short that filling it with 4 more deadlines would be deadly. So we give you these milestones as a suggestion of if this is the kind of tempo that we expect you to work on. So I think all of you, if you put in the hours and if you work hard, as most of you will do, then you should be able to finish the task of implementing min-max, alpha-beta pruning, and maybe the multi-color sampling of a part of it is already done, and playing around with this, looking at more your own implementation easily. But if you, at the end of this week, fail to get the engine running and get any agents running, then this should suggest that you are getting into a little bit of trouble, because it won't get easier next week. There will be more content. There will be more working groups that you have to sort of get into the theory. So take these milestones as an indication. The idea is well that at the end of the project in general, that you add the worksheets just as an extra incentive for you to really take them seriously and think of these questions, give answers, but we will not check them. We don't have the resources to check these worksheets, and it's not necessary either. Yeah? Okay. Let me try alpha-beta pruning. So it's a simple function that takes a state as input and returns an action to take. So exactly the same as with min-max. And it basically is exactly the same as min-max, but now we don't have a value assigned to a state, but we have an interval assigned to a state. Yeah? So the input is a state, which is the current state in the game, in the state space. And the value is calculated as the maximum value of the state with 2 input variables, namely the alpha value, which is the minimal value, and the beta value, which is the maximum value. And this is the call. The call is then the 2 functions again, recursively, the max value and the min value. It's exactly the same procedure as we had with the min-max algorithm before. So this is obviously where the name comes from. The alpha gives you the minimal value, and the beta gives you the maximum possible value that you could choose from. So max value, in case it's max's turn, of course, otherwise we would call min. Max's value gets, in the first state, it gets an interval alpha beta minus infinity to infinity. And it returns the value, a utility value or a heuristic value, whatever you choose in this case, by first checking whether you are at a goal state. Is it a goal state or is it a terminal state? So if you have a cutoff of, say, depth 5, have we reached this terminal position that we are not exploring it any further? And if it does, you just return the value of this state. So that was basically when we had our search tree. We started out with this example where we had, I think, a max to start with and a min to start with. and we ended up in a leaf and we had these values 3, 2, 2, then you would end up in a leaf or in a cutoff state, and you would just return the 3. So now we are in a state in this loop. We are in a state where we have successors. So it's a max choice, and there are some successors. And we know some intervals. So now for all the successors in the state, we just take the maximum value of the value that we started with minus infinity, with the minimum value that we call recursively from all the states underneath, with alpha and beta as the same parameters. Another point is that if you, and you get this maximum value back. The point is that if your v value is bigger than beta, then you return this value. And if this v value is not bigger, then you return the maximum value. So basically you take you build this interval explicitly. And you do exactly the same for min later on. So here we call max value first. We then do this calculation of the maximum of the min values, and if the value becomes bigger than beta, then we return the value and we go out of the loop. And this is the place where the pruning takes place. Because if we find a value which is bigger than the interval value, we know that we don't have to proceed anymore. And there's exactly the same, but in the inverse order for the min, where we have the min value. It's called again in the recursive procedure, and then we have to start with a plus infinitive value to give the upper bound, and then we have the upper bound defined by the min values of all the successors. And if we get to a position that is smaller than the interval, the left-hand side of the interval, then we can stop the search and we get out and we just return the value that we have calculated. And otherwise, we continue the loop. So that's all the algorithm does. And explaining algorithms in class is always, I think, rather tedious. And so just have a look at it, and you have to implement it for the worksheet. And I think it's rather intuitive and easy to do. So if in the theory group tomorrow, you will also practice how this works on a more intuitive level. The core point of this algorithm is that it's a complete algorithm. So still, you get the same result, exactly the same results. The pruning does not affect the results of the query, of the calculation of the min-max. So the only thing that changes is that you do not have to evaluate nodes that you know up front that they're redundant, so that they can't influence your results. And while in the example that I gave, there were individual nodes that you didn't have to calculate, in real life, you might be able to prune the entire tree, the subtree that's underneath, and that really makes it efficient. If you order the nodes up front, then this can really make an enormous difference. So if you always know that you try to estimate that the smallest ones, for example, come in a min choice at the first one, then you might already get your contradiction so that you don't have to calculate the rest. And with the perfect ordering, if it would exist, the perfect ordering, then you could reduce the complexity by an exponential factor of 2, so half of the exponential depth. And that basically implies that you can look in the same time twice as deep. And that's very powerful. So if you consider in chess, suppose you have a heuristic that allows you to calculate min-max up to a depth of 10 moves ahead, compare that with an algorithm that could do 20 moves ahead. I think that would really make a huge difference in the quality of your estimation of your results. Okay. That was all on alpha beta pruning, and that was all on min-max. For the milestone in week 1, and also for the project that you have to hand in, you should implement phase 2 of the game, which is the complete information game. We have the perfect information. It's not too big. Min-max should be very fast. But still, we should do it efficiently, because in the information that we get later, if you see later in the imperfect information game of phase 1, we might want to implement the imperfection of the game by frequently calling this complete min-max algorithm. And I talk about hundreds of thousands of times. So if you manage to spare 20 milliseconds per min-max, and you do it hundreds of thousands of times, we're talking a change in times in order of magnitude, so that you really get seconds faster, many seconds, if not hours, if you do it really frequently, if you have to do it often. So let's do this efficiently. Let's do it with alpha beta pruning. That's basically the message. So implement your algorithms for min-max, implement the alpha beta pruning algorithm, and then that's already something to be quite excited about at the end of this week, if you manage. And as I said, we provided some programming skeletons so that you don't have to take care of the nitty-gritty of the programming. Maybe we won't use either, because we're sort of doing experiments. We are running a little bit ahead of you, not much, but we're a little bit ahead of you. And it's very difficult to see whether the min-max and the alpha beta pruning really makes a difference in terms of performance. And I mean quality of the game. Or whether if you do a random sampling, as I will describe soon, whether that will work almost as good. We'll see. So before I get into the sort of more advanced application of imperfect information in Schnapsen, I want more on a conceptual level to talk about partial information or missing information. So how can we still apply this if we don't have information about the game? So if we have missing information. So there are 3 sort of typical types of problems in this area of partial information, and the one is that the situation might change. So if you get more information, that's one thing, but the other thing is that also it doesn't really happen in our game that you it does actually. So if that's what I explained before. So if we make a decision on which move to take, we sort of guess what move my opponent could take, but we don't know it. But after some time, when the player has made the move, we get new information. So we kind of have to recalculate our strategy. And we can make use of this information. So we could make contingencies, and these algorithms that we apply here, these min-max algorithms, they make contingency plans by already taking into account all the possible actions of my opponent. So this is one of the elements of the uncertainty, that we don't know what our opponent is going to do. And min-max is really the approach to do this in a systematic way. Exploration problems is in our case is not really the problem, because we know what the next step is. But in some applications of these technologies, you don't really know what happens when you make a certain move. So if you drive a car, you don't really know what can happen, because there is so much information, for example. And sometimes you can't even sense, you don't even know what the board position is. So it really is guesswork. But so even for these completely sensorless problems, the technology can be applied in some way or another. And here's the example. We have a Hoover, and the Hoover does the same things as it did before. It can go right, it can clean, it can go left, and it can go right, it can clean, and it can go left. And it clean and suck is the same thing. So I changed one word and I didn't change the other one. So the problem is it can't sense. It has no sensors. It doesn't know whether it's in the left room, it's on the right room, whether it is clean in the room or whether it's dirty in the room. So you might almost say there's nothing that the Hoover can do in an intelligent way, but it can, and that is by restricting the possibilities that the states it could be in. So when the world is not fully observable, we can reason about the states still. We can apply logic. And this is what we're going to do next week in the part about knowledge, where we try to apply reasoning rules to get more information about the states we could end up in. And this is usually, if you collect those states that you could be in, it's usually called belief states. So what you do is not transition from a state to another state, but what you do is a transition from a possible state, a set of possible states, to a set of possible states. Basically, if there are S number of states, you can now talk about 2 to the power of S belief states, possibilities of where you could be. So this is how this looks now. If you remember the graphics where we only had one of those images, where the state was connected to another state. And basically what happens is you have this situation in the middle where there are 8 positions. The Hoover is on the left, the Hoover is on the right, the room is clean. There are 8 different positions. Basically, this is the information. We don't have any information, we don't know anything. So that's the moment of sort of perfect imperfection. So we have no information about anything. But now the thing is that if you take an action in one of those states, in one of the belief states, you transition to another belief state because you learn something. And your belief state changes. For example, if you are a robot and you move to the left, you know that you will be in the left position. So basically there are only 4 positions left. So from the belief state of 8 unknown states, by taking an action, you know where you are a bit better, yeah? You still don't know clean or not clean. So if you clean, then suddenly there are only 2 possibilities left. And it could be moving then to the right, and it will get you to the solution. Because then in these last 2 belief states, there is only 1 state left, so you know that this is a goal state. So basically these belief states, they collect possible worlds in which something might be true or might not be true. And this is exactly what we're going to also look now in the Schnapsen game. Because what you basically want to do is in Schnapsen that you consider all possible games when you have to make a decision. Could be a position where you know your own 5 cards, but there are 14 cards in the beginning that you don't know. And it could be that your opponent has very bad cards and will only get bad cards, and you win the game. Could also be that he has very good cards. So you have to take care of all these possibilities. So this is the bad news that I talked about before. We have 5 cards on one hand. This is now the starting positions. We start phase 1, 14 cards are unknown. So 5 cards, I know where they are in my hand. And there is the trump card. The trump card is the one that is, after the 10 cards are given, is opened, and it determines what is the trump, and it will be distributed as the last of the cards from the pile. So I know of my 5 cards, I know the trump card, and the other 14 cards I do not know. So basically, I know that I have the choice of choosing 5 cards to play, and after that, there's very little I know. So how can we make any intelligent agent play this game? So there is one element of chance in the beginning, and so when the cards are distributed, there is obviously an element of chance. But after that, we have no element of chance, we have no uncertainty. The game engine always knows in which state the game is in. And the uncertainty comes from the imperfection of the information that we have about the game. And we have to deal with this uncertainty, and we do this by, in the same way, thinking in the same way as we do with the belief states. So I showed you this slide before. There is the information is available, so it's not, there is no element of chance coming anymore. So once the cards are distributed, it's a fully deterministic game. But for the player, and basically that's you when you implement your intelligent game engine, your bot, you only know of the cards in your own hand and the trump card. And what you also can, if you're a good player, you know your own hand, or not. If you're a reasonable player, you know how many points you have already won. If you are a slightly better player, you also know how many points your opponent has played. And if you are even better player, you also know which cards have already been played and won. My memory is about 3 cards that have been won and my own points, and then the rest I can't. But we assume here that we have the information about the previous cards at hand. We know which cards have been played, and we know how many points we have and the opponent have. So that's something that we give to the bot. So the agent has this information. It still doesn't have the information of the 14 cards that it doesn't know where they are. So the question is, will the simple min-max approach work if we just say, in the first stage, I can give my 5 cards. So I have 5 cards. So that was my initial idea, and I was quickly told by Peter, who knows more about this, that it was a very stupid idea. So we have five cards that I could play myself. And then my suggestion was, why do we just look at all the 14 different cards as a min-max problem? So we would have 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 14. And then we do the same for all these 5. Yeah? You understand what I'm doing? Is that, yeah? So basically then, why do I put 6 here? It's stupid. So basically, that would mean that in the first step, I would have 5 nodes to explore, and then there would be 14 on the next level. Yeah? So then on the next one, and that's why I already run into trouble, I would have 5 cards again, which I could choose from. And my opponent now has not 14 cards, but 12 cards left. The unknown are 12. Yes? You still with me? Yeah. So I have 5, 10, 5, 8. And we play 5. So this is a trick, this is a trick, this is a trick. And this is a trick. 1, 2, 3, 4. I thought it would go down quicker than that to 0 cards on the unknown. Oh no, the 5 cards of my opponent are slow out there. So basically we get to this would be then have to be multiplied, so we would have 5 times 14 times 5 times 12, 5 times 10, and then we would, at the end, we would get to the perfect information min-max. So I don't know whether anybody has a calculator. You could calculate this number. I think it's 10 million or something like this. So we would have 10 millions of our min-max calculations to be done. Yes?
The next step, why it's 5, not 4?
Because you get a card from the...
But I already played a card.
You play a card, but you get one from the pile, so it's always filled up again. Your opponent gets another card, so that's why 2 cards, you know 1 card from your opponent, you know 1 more card that you take from the pile, so you get the uncertainty is reduced by 2. This goes down in 5 tricks to the level of where you have the 5 cards from your opponent. So basically I thought we have about 1 million or 10 million something times our 14,000 nodes. So that's nice, we can do that. Yeah, it's hard to calculate big numbers of nodes that we have to calculate. Unfortunately, it's nonsense. So who can tell me where my argument goes wrong? Anybody? If that was the game, Schnapsen would be easy. Yeah. Easy to implement as an intelligent agent. Yeah?
Your opponent never had access to all the cards.
The opponent has never access to all the cards, so that's a sort of a philosophical argument, I would say, because basically what I do here is that I estimate that my opponent has the choice for all the possible cards, so he will always play with the perfect set of cards. Yes?
The thing is, because the opponent doesn't have all cards, he will not play optimally. That can ultimately show.
Yes, the point was made that if the opponent, because the opponent doesn't have all the optimal cards, it will the strategy will be different. Yes, yes. So you have another point, yeah.
As the deck becomes smaller, you become more certain about what cards are still left in the game, so you're not completely uncertain.
Okay, so that was what I tried to explain here, that the uncertainty in each of the steps goes down, because here there are only 10 possibilities for. But the thing that doesn't work, so I think both these points are very to the point, because basically you estimate always that the opponent has a perfect deck. So you always play against the perfect deck and you will always lose.
But for example, if there are only 2 cards left in the deck, you can estimate or guess which 2 cards those are. So you're not completely uncertain about those.
Yes, but this would be exactly the choice you had between the 2. So that would be taking care of the min-max algorithm. So that's what I tried to implement here. But the point, if you look at it from a practical perspective, what will happen here, that would still work. But the next thing here, it goes wrong, because there is a card that I draw from the deck. And this card that I draw from the deck, from the pile, I don't know what it is. So I would also, for this card, I wouldn't just have one option, but I again have 10 belief states. So basically, I don't have 5 options here, but I have 5 times 5 plus all the uncertain ones. And basically, from this moment, what I would evaluate would be a perfect game, an engine with all the perfect cards playing against an algorithm with all the perfect cards, and it basically becomes nonsense. Yeah? So this simple way of thinking about it doesn't work. So what do we need to do? We need to go down the belief state world. That's why I tried to explain this belief state idea. And basically, what does it mean is that what this means is that I have still my 5 cards that I can play. We have, in principle, there is one state, so the choices have been made. There is no uncertainty in the game engine. But I simply don't know. But I have to now take care of all the possible distributions of cards in a valid way. So what I have to do is when I want to establish whether this is a good move or not to play this card, I have to look at the ways of how these 14 cards are distributed over the 4 cards of my opponent and the 9 cards that are left in the pile. Yeah? And if you know a little bit about combinatorics, this is what's called 14 over 5. These are the different possibilities you can distribute 14 cards over 5 cards my opponents could have. Because this is what I want to know. I want to know which of the cards are in the hand of my opponent. So this is 14 over 5 times, because I also need to multiply it with all the different orders that I could have the cards in the pile. There are 9 cards in the pile. So this is the number of possible belief states that are out there. That's the number of different ways that the cards have been distributed. Can anybody calculate this number for me at the moment? Or no? So it's this is 14 faculty divided by 5 faculty times 9 faculty, I think. So it's 14 times 13 times 12 times L, 11 times 10, divided by 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So it's 14 times 13 times 11. Can anybody calculate this for me? Yeah? Here I get to the limited knowledge or active knowledge of my combinatorics, but the 5 cards that your opponent has, it doesn't matter in which order they are. But the order in the pile is important because that determines which card you get next. So we have to do the 5 random cards that are distributed from these 14. So you draw 5 cards from the 14 and you distribute them without order. That's this. That's the definition of 14 over 5. But then you also get, for the 9 cards that remain, you get the possible ranking. So there are 9 different positions, and it might be more. This might be incorrect. I'm not sure. But anyway, I mean the point I want to make is that we're talking about tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of belief states. And we have to check them for each of the choices that we make at each of the levels. So we're talking about 5 times, this might be 20,000 or so. And then we have 5 times, we go to the next level, but then it reduces, the branching factor reduces a bit, but you can see that the amount of nodes that we have now to check, where each node is a belief state, so each node is a deck of cards, gets enormous. So now you see what we are up to, and my comments about Schnapsen being a simple game, an easy game to implement, should become clear that this is not the case. Yes?
14 times 13 times 11 is 2,000.
Yeah. Okay, so basically what this means is that we have a game with a branching factor of 2,000, and I believe that I have to check this with Peter. I think that here I made a mistake. Yeah. Believe me, we have, if you consider chess, you have a branching factor of about 20. We have a branching factor of 2,000 at least. So we're really getting into a problem that we have to search a tree that is incredibly complex. So that gets us to the question, and I answered it already, is Schnapsen really a simple game? And the answer is no, it's not. Otherwise we couldn't have turned it into a research problem for you to work on. The second phase is simple. It can be fully calculated. But if you can introduce the uncertainty from not knowing the cards and you still want to play a meaningful, intelligent agent, then the problem becomes all but simple, but incredibly complex. So the standard way of dealing with these cards, games which have incredibly big branching factor because of the number of belief states, is to apply what's called perfect information Monte Carlo sampling. This is sort of the little brother of what has been used for AlphaGo, because it's a very naive brute force version of doing sampling and averaging over samples. And there is the bigger brother is Monte Carlo search tree algorithms, which does a tree search, Monte Carlo tree search algorithm, which sort of guides the search in these trees. Because Go, the game that I talked about on Monday, which has sort of been one of the big successes of AI, also suffers from this problem that it has an enormous amount of breadth in the search tree and also depth in the search tree. So you have, I think, in a 9x9 board, I think that it's a huge number of places where you can put your figures. So they suffer from the same problem. And the way they dealt with this is a sort of advanced version of this. In the first week, we can do this very simple perfect information Monte Carlo sampling. And basically what this means is that we have our 5 cards that we can play. And at the moment where we have sort of, if we want to explore the quality of this, playing the card number 1, we simply run a big number of samples that runs the game in a random way by using possible cards. So we would say, for example, we are in a state, we take one of those belief states. So what would be the possible card our opponent would have? And then we would just run a game in a random way, purely random. So there would be no intelligence involved. You would simply you choose a card your opponent, a set your opponent could have, and you run a random game. And you do that many, many times with different guesses that what your opponent could have, and then you average over it. And then basically the one card which comes up with the highest average will be the one that is suggested you choose. And if you look at the working sheets, then the RDeep algorithm does more or less exactly this. So this is just a more fancy name. We look at all the possible belief states. So the top of the pyramid is my choice. We have the 5 cards that you can choose. You choose all possible belief states, and then you do a random rollout, as it's called. So the rollout assumes perfect information, and it just hammers the game engine to give the according to the rules the next state if you take random choices of your own cards. So basically the strategy here is that you average over random games. Give me 2 sets of cards, you play it in a random order, and if one side wins more often, you get a higher score than if the other side wins more often. Sounds incredibly naive, sounds almost impossible that it works, but it's the most frequent standard way of implementing these card game AIs. My ambition, or our ambition, is for the research next week is, can we sort of help with this first phase, this complexity, by saying we're not really looking at these states in the first place in all these cards, but we simply think of a strategy. Whenever I have a jack, I play the jack. Whenever I have a jack and a 10, I play the jack. Whenever I have a queen and a king from the same color, I play the marriage. So a simple set of sort of human heuristics, whether we can beat this sort of brute force averaging approach. That's a perfectly interesting, for me at least, it's an interesting research question, and this is the kind of things that I expect you to do next week. And then the next question, of course, becomes, can we now apply a neural network? Can we train a neural network so that it tells us the the choices to make not on the basis of an average, a simple averaging function, but on the basis of a trained machine learning model. And hopefully by the end of week 3, we then have various intelligent agents that can play the game, even if we have this enormous amount of complexity in the possible belief states. So, today my ending is slightly better timed. So the summary is that we have min-max and alpha-beta pruning for the second phase. So it's a small search space, and we can come up with an algorithm that calculates the possible winning strategy. Phase 1 really destroys all this because it basically increases the complexity so that we cannot do a complete algorithm anymore. We need to do this kind of sampling, statistical sampling over all possibilities, and then it has been shown that this perfect information Monte Carlo is very difficult to beat. We try to do it anyway. And then next week, does human knowledge help? In week 3, does learning help? But tomorrow I want to sort of pick up some loose ends. I will also take some time for you to, if you have questions, that we might calculate some examples, talk about some of the search algorithms that I hadn't time to talk about. But now you can start doing the implementation and get running with the project. Good luck.